Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural first episode of Teatime with Teawrex. I'm joined by my new friend. I can't say good friend. I hope we become good friends, but I am here with my friend Cameron MunchaKoopas SK. And today, we are here to talk to you, or I guess I'm here to ask questions about QA for game development. QA stands for quality assurance. For those of you at home who don't know what that's about, we're going to be diving into it. So if you are very new or don't know a lot about kind of how game design stuff works, don't worry. We're going to be trying our best to make everything as like entry level, simple as possible. But yeah, hi everyone. Welcome, Cameron. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, let's see. I've been in the game industry for about 4 years now, going on 5. I got my start at Yacht Club Games as a tester on Shovel Knight. I helped them finish up Shovel Knight King of Cards and Shovel Knight Showdown. From there, I went to Blizzard Entertainment, and now I just recently started a new gig at that game company. So I'm working on Sky, Children of the Light.
Interesting. Have you always been like in game dev? Like, what have you done besides that? If you don't mind asking.
Before that, I worked a bunch of different odd jobs. I was a music major in college. I used to play bass, actually. I was in my college orchestra.
Nice.
Um, but I had to quit during my last year of school due to an injury.
Oh, that's
So I
less
don't,
nice.
yeah, that's less nice, but I still learned a lot. And basically, after college, I worked whatever part-time or full-time job I could find. I used to work at a car auction. I did some stints in IT for a bit. But I decided to give speedrunning a try because it combined like my love of video games with my love of performing, which led me to speedrunning Shovel Knight for games done quick, which then led me to, like I said, work at Yacht Club, and now I've been working in the game industry for a few years in the quality assurance space.
Yeah, that's very familiar to me. Because I also kind of got into like performative gaming due to speedrunning. So it's always fun around other people who kind of like also around the same time kind of walked a very similar path, like we might have diverged, but it's like, oh, we have the similar superhero origin almost, it's fun. um so aside from like your work experience, anything that you think would be interesting for us to know about you before going forward?
Um, I don't think so. I'm pretty average otherwise. Like,
Nice.
I work in QA, I work on the games committee for games done quick. I know a lot about music. I don't really know what else.
I mean, I think
Uh,
I think all that's pretty amazing.
see what I'm trying to think of any like fun facts. Nope.
Nope. Do you have any pets?
I used to. I used to have a cat. He sadly passed away in June, but that's okay.
I'm sorry to hear that. we
It
we,
happens.
we love our fluffy friends here.
We do. Your long-haired fluffy friend reminds me of my long-haired fluffy
Oh
friend.
yeah, Biscuit. He's a good boy. He's not very smart, but he's a very good boy. Um, well, okay. I guess we can go ahead and just kind of like jump right into it. So can you explain to people who are listening for the first time, what is QA specifically for like game development? Like, what is that?
Hmm. So quality assurance itself is the act of finding defects and assessing risk. That's like the most base level like description I could give of it. Keep in mind, I am not a computer scientist. Like I said, I was a music major. I don't know jack about programming or any of that. So everything I know about this is like self-taught, that I've learned through my own study or just through being a user of video games and other software. Um, but essentially, like I said, quality assurance boils down to finding defects and assessing risks. There's various levels of like work you can do in QA. Like you could be a basic level execution, like entry level tester. You could be a little above that, which is what I do, which is a test analyst, but it has various titles at various companies.
Hmm.
But essentially, they're the people that like write the test cases and the test plans, and they look at like what the changes are going into the game and like they assess what needs to be checked and by whom, and like what is the most efficient way to do it. And then of course above them you have management and et cetera, all the way up. And so it's a whole bunch of different layers of essentially risk assessment and really a lot of spreadsheet editing.
So you said it a few times now. Can you tell me more about what you mean by risk assessment?
So risk assessment is it can mean many different things. From my best understanding, it's like in terms of video games, it's like what is going to go wrong, especially on like the player's end, or what's going to go wrong like for the sake of our software. Um, so like in a game that has microtransactions, you could say a risk could be that like players are charged twice when they like buy an item.
Gotcha.
Um, you know, do and it's a possibility, but again, that just depends on how things are set up. That's maybe a bit nebulous, but like that is something I've seen happen before. So that's the only reason I bring it up. But it's aside from stuff like that, it's also like, hey, we're introducing this type of object in this level for like this seasonal event. Um, would that cause any like unforeseen problems because of any like mechanics that or like interactions that our design team or whomever might not be aware of? Um, it's difficult to really like gauge what risk assessment is without like really digging into like
Sure.
super specifics.
Sure.
But
Well,
yeah.
let me see if I can ask it in a better way. So, like,
hmm
is risk assessment uh almost like you are like preparing or assuming what kind of issues may arise by making these changes or additions to like this like game environment?
Exactly. That's exactly it. So like
Okay.
in the case of like say I'm given a new like thing that's being put in a game, like say a new level, and I'm told to like write some tests for this to then send off to a group of testers. So the types of things I'm thinking about from like a risk assessment point of view are like, how do I access the level? Like how does the game work? Is this like a world
Okay.
map like Mario World? Am I like clicking on a node like in Destiny? Um, like at what point in like the story or what level of progression do players have to be in to access this level?
Okay.
Um, Other sorts of risks are like, does the level include assets that aren't planned yet or like aren't included yet, which is a common crash in some cases. I don't know how many times that happened on Shovel Knight. Boot up the PlayStation 4, cannot load title screen.png.
Oof.
That actual error didn't happen, but that's the type of thing that happens where
Sure.
it's just like, why did it stop working? We didn't load the color blue. Sorry.
Oh, and of course that means everything else breaks because the color blue didn't load.
Yeah, yeah.
So like for risk assessment, on top of what appears to be like predicting the bugs before you find them, so like understanding kind of like what additions or changes might impact, across the board to the state of the game.
hmm
Does it also count for things like that are like confusing to the player? Like, would risk assessment be, let's say you put in a new object and let's say a platformer. Would QA or risk assessment be involved with a player understanding what to do with that object?
To some extent, yes. It depends on like how the QA team like functions within that organization.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because there are different aspects of QA. Like, there's user research, which isn't necessarily quality assurance, but it is another aspect of game development that's like, yeah, I'm not necessarily like designing the game mechanics. I am assessing the game in terms of like accessibility. Um,
Which is
you
very
know,
important, especially now.
yeah. So those types of concerns do come up, but a lot of those things don't necessarily fall specifically on QA. Like generally, especially on smaller teams, any sort of feedback and any sort of like qualitative assessment like that is usually like it's open for everybody to participate essentially,
Gotcha.
because many different disciplines will have different sorts of perspectives and like ideas as to like what should happen or what they'd like to see, etc.
I gotcha. Um,
But like I have had tasks where it's like, hey, play through this thing and tell me what you think, or like, hey, is this level too hard or too easy for X, Y, or Z player?
and I think that you mentioned that stuff like that could be like asked of like anyone in the company, not just like specifically QA.
Yeah, but like
Gotcha.
but like QA does get those types of tasks sometimes. Like
Okay,
that is a thing QA would handle.
I understand. Um, Is there like different sides of quality assurance that deal with like different aspects of the game? So like, for example, like testing menus versus like, let's say like testing movement for a character, you know, like Mario and like Nintendo game versus like opening up a menu in like a Final Fantasy game. Like, are those like two different departments, or is it just like QA's blanket over just anything inside of the game?
Again, it depends on like the company you work for. Most organizations tend to break things out as far as like feature ownership. So like, say there's like an in-game shop for you to buy things, like real money purchases or something.
Okay.
Maybe I'd be the feature owner of like that shop, and I'm responsible for knowing the ins and outs of like that shop. I know everything about that shop, like when the schedules happen, when price changes happen, etc., etc. That said, I probably have no idea what's going on in the PvP space of the game and like that balancing or like what the levels look like or any of that. So
Gotcha.
like it just depends on like how granular you want to make your testing force. Because like some of the larger companies, they do devote just an entire like small team to like, hey, you're working on the new like dungeon, or like this team is working on the new seasonal event,
Mm-hmm.
or this team is in charge of the Xbox submissions and all that stuff. Um, so it just depends on like the size of the studio. Otherwise, you can end up wearing multiple hats.
So what I'm hearing is that QA is a little bit of like kind of can do everything a little bit, or at least like touches seemingly every single part of the game at all stages of the game until it's completed.
That is accurate. QA is unique in that aspect, in that like we as a discipline do get to interact with every other discipline, and we need some base level understanding of like what they are doing and how
Mm-hmm.
they are doing, like how they are implementing things. Um, Like I obviously it would benefit me greatly if I knew how to program in C++. Obviously I'd be qualified to be a programmer, but for the purposes of like assessing code and speaking to programmers, I'd be able to, better utilize that skill set. Um, but being that I am not a programmer, it still helps for me to understand like terms like what is a call stack, what sort of things should I look for when I find a crash? What sort of logs do I want to get? Like, what info do I need to get back to my development team so that they can effectively do their job? And I'm rambling a bit, but like,
No,
that's just
please
one
ramble
example.
away. I find this incredibly interesting. I love
Also, like,
rambling, because rambling I think is almost kind of when you get like to like maybe like an unspoken truth by accident, just because you're
mm,
talking and then you kind of like have like a self-realization, like, oh, that thing, and then you kind of have like a
no,
eureka moment.
it's true. But like further on that thinking, like there are teams that specialize in reviewing code and reviewing those changes that programmers put in. There are teams that specialize in art testing, so they'll specifically look at how the models, the animations are put into the game, and if those are like working properly and all that. Um,
Gotcha.
so there's a never-ending like the thing about game development that's like great, but that's also kind of terrifying is that you can really get into the minutia of the details and like hyper specify in like
Yeah.
one specific thing, and like that's both beneficial and non-beneficial, because it's like, hey, you're the world's foremost expert on nanotechnology, but like there's only three of you, so chances are that, I don't know,
you,
you
you
might
can't
not
do
be able to utilize
everything.
this.
Yeah, like it seems like from what you're telling me that like it seems like it can be kind of easy to get I don't know a better term, but like like almost like lost and can't see the forest from the trees because you're just in the middle of all of this stuff going on around you, that keeping track
Mm.
of what your tasks are and not hyper focusing on stuff is probably incredibly hard, which actually kind of transitions into a topic that's very at least important to me because of my rudimentary understanding of like game development.
Mm.
There is this opinion where a lot of gamers say that I can't believe that XYZ thing, like a bug, got shipped with this game. Like they're blown away that like someone like you would just
Mm.
completely ignore that this issue existed and that you just shipped you didn't fix it. Why didn't you fix it? Could you walk me through? We're gonna go through all of that, but let's start with the first thing.
Mm.
Talk to me about finding a bug. So let's discover a bug together really quick.
Okay,
What
let's
does that
see.
look like?
Let me start with one that is similar to an actual bug I have found in a game. So say you have an enemy, let's say we're playing Mario, and you come across the Goomba stack enemy. Like it's 10 Goombas all
Oh yeah,
stacked on
like
top
the
of each
the
other,
tall
right?
boys.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So say that there is a mechanic that allows you to like knock one Goomba out of the stack, and then the rest of the Goombas like collapse and they continue on their merry Goomba stack, journey. Um, Now, say you are playing the game and you notice that like there's a certain spot where maybe if you time things just right, you could get some of the logic in how this all works to fail. And so you do the thing you're thinking of doing, and you knock that Goomba out of the stack, but the stack doesn't collapse. And the game continues for a bit because, everything is technically fine, but then the next time it goes to update that Goomba's like status or whatever, the game will crash. That's very similar to an actual bug I have found in a video game.
Oh, that's fun.
But
It's just like, oh, I lost the Goomba, so game go away now. I don't have the Goomba.
yes.
I gotta close the game.
Yes.
I'm missing a Goomba. I have to go find it. I'm very busy.
Yes. So
Um,
in moments like that, it's just you take a moment, you think, okay. I mean, oh gosh, there's this again, like QA, like I said, QA is nebulous. So like that's a scenario where I thought something specific would happen. Like I came across a scenario, I saw an interaction, and I thought about it for a moment and thought, I bet I could break this by doing this thing, and it happened. And
there's like a native speedrunner truth spoken there, where you can like look at something and you're just like, I bet I can make that do something it's not supposed to do. Like you get that feeling, and it's just like it's fun in its own way until like it does something terrible, and then you're like, I don't want to do that again. Like I know back when I used to speedrun Borderlands 2, we found a couple like really big like unintended doing a lot of circumstantial stuff, like oh game crashes, like, and then your speed runs over. Have fun, you're done. So what do you do after we've established the Goomba stack bug? That is what we're calling this for this
yes,
scenario.
yes, we have found the Goomba stack bug.
We have found
What do we do next?
bug discovered. So yeah, what is the next step after the discovery of the Goomba stack bug?
So that depends on many things. For like, let me think for a moment. Okay, so to break this down, as far as what to do, it depends. Like I said, it depends. One is this like, is this a new object that was just introduced, or is this an object that has like introduced or has been in the game for a while? Just because that would help us figure out what sort of like info we need to go hunting for. For the
Okay.
sake of this example, let's just say that like that like this game is in development and this Goomba was like just put into the game. So it's like it's brand new, we expect things like this to happen. So in this case, since it's brand new, we know we don't need to go search through our bug database to see if like this bug already exists, which is like another thing that I would have to do if I was just playing the game and found a bug. So that's step one, is like, does the bug exist in whatever tracking software you are using? If not, write it up, obviously. So then it's a matter of being as like concise as possible with your description and your reproduction steps.
To interrupt really quick, do you also do stuff like attach like footage if it's possible, to where it's like you'll describe like maybe like the button inputs as best as you can, and then also be like, here's the footage of me doing all of that?
Yep.
Okay.
Like all ABC, always be recording. Just trust me, it works.
I mean, there is a C in recording, so I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I mean, just age-old wisdom, because obviously the moment you stop recording, you will find that bug, the 1 in a million, and it will never happen again.
It's how many people do like either like Pokemon card opening streams or like this, that, or the other, and they're like, all right, I didn't get what I'm looking for, and like the moment they turn off the stream, it's like, of course, then the very next thing is like that exact thing they were looking for. It's just
Yep.
every time.
But to answer your question, like, yes, attaching like screenshots, videos, any relevant info I can is obviously like important. And then there's also a whole bunch of other info you'd fill out, like, what build did this happen on? What platform were you playing on?
Okay.
Et cetera, all, boring software lingo.
So what do you do after that? So this, just for this hypothetical, let's say you're playing on the Switch, and you find this on like the Switch version of the game while you're testing for it. What is the next step, like seeing if it's replicatable? I mean, I'm assuming you want to do the replicatable next, but aside from that, would you do it across like every platform as well before you start like trying to like isolate it, or maybe I might be getting ahead of myself. So like, what is next? I don't even know. I just ask you, what's next?
No, see, so that is a good question though, as far as like, do you want to check it on other platforms? Which is like, again, it's like it depends. That's always the answer in QA, and that's where like, that's where the analogy I like to think of for QA is like, that's where an analogy of like your QA tester is a sword. How sharp your sword is determines like how well you know your bug database and how well you know whether or not you'll need to check like other platforms for something. So in the case of like, do you need to check other platforms? It's like, well, is there precedent for this happening on another platform? Like, what type of issue is it? For something like this is an issue with like that enemy specifically. So like, I would assume it would happen anywhere and everywhere that I could find that enemy, unless further research, led me to believe something otherwise. But for sake of simplicity, let's just say we've had our bug, the research is done, we're pretty sure about things. We would likely then assign it to, let's just say we're working at an indie company, because that's much simpler. At that point, I
Then to say you're working for Nintendo, yeah, probably.
Yeah, so at that point, I'd assign it back to like the designer or the programmer that like implemented that enemy, and say, here's what happened. Here's how I got it to happen again and again. Like, here's all the stuff I have. Maybe if you're really lucky and you have a really skilled development team, they have a really handy replay feature that will replay their inputs in a certain format so they can see in the code what you did to mess things up. And then they can go on their way and fix things and everything can be great. So at that point, like, you've sent the bug off, you've done what you need to do. You're waiting for them to come back to you with a fix or with more questions. So ideally, what you want to see as a QA specialist is what you want to get back is like, thank you for sending this. Like, I have implemented the fix with this change list and it's going to be in this build. Maybe here's like some more specific info in case you want to look up more stuff about this. Maybe here's like some actual detailed changes as to like what I did to help solve this problem. And then you can be like, great, I'll make sure to verify all of that, and then you go on your merry way and hopefully the bug is fixed.
Gotcha.
That will never happen to you.
Does that never happen out once? Not once? Was it like, oh, it's a simple fix? Not once?
No. Well, so the thing is,
Brutal.
yes, it's a simple fix. It's more of like getting the detailed info back is not something that
Oh,
happens
okay. I was like, man, this is actually way... for a moment, I was like, this is way worse than I thought it was. And I already thought it was pretty bad. Sheesh.
Oh, no, that was just a silly QA joke of, like, programmers and designers never like to give us any info or any documentation of any sort. You know who you are, audience members. I'm kidding, though. Well, to some extent. But...
I understand.
But, like, yeah, at that point, like, it basically becomes a dialogue between you and whoever is trying to fix the bug, between, like, what needs to be done to actually resolve the issue, or, in some cases, analyze, is this actually an issue? Because, like, that's another part of bug writing is, like, depending on the team and how you want to structure things, sometimes I have written bugs that are just like, hey, like, this is happening, or, like, I am seeing this. Is this supposed to happen? Because we don't have any like documentation or anything supporting like there's no precedent for any of this. So it's like
there's the joke about, is this a feature or is it a bug? Like, which one is it? I don't know yet.
Yeah, and ultimately that's only for the gameplay programmer to decide. But anyway.
So to round back to at least one thing you talked about, there's a couple of things I'd like to round back to. But one is you talked about how like it's very nebulous on like kind of what the next step is in regards to, do you check other platforms and stuff like that. In our scenario, or I guess maybe in most game studios, is that kind of like the purpose, or at least part of the purpose of leadership, is to have the veterans who have maybe vast knowledge of like the bug database, vast knowledge of like all parts of the game, and then obviously the thing that you're playing. Would you then be like, hey, person who is, let's say I'm Junior Little Baby Man, and then you're my boss. Do I go to you and be like, hey, I found the Goomba stack bug. Do you want me to like? Should I test that out on Steam as well as like Xbox, or do we think it's just like the Switch? Like, what is the dialogue going on between you and the rest of your team regarding that?
Hmm. For something like that, like you're right in that it's basically like that's where management and like the more veteran members of a QA team would ideally step in as far as advising like, how extensive do we need to make our checks and our tests for this. It more so comes down to just like knowledge of how issues tend to manifest themselves. And what sorts of issues are things that are like likely to happen on one platform versus another. Like gameplay specific things like this Goomba stack hypothetical. That's like I said, it'll probably happen everywhere. That's a pretty clean and cut, like that's happening because of this enemy. Like the logic of that enemy has nothing to do with like whether it's on Xbox or PlayStation or what
Yeah.
have you. Versus if something's like a graphics rendering issue, like that could be a completely different thing depending on what like console you're checking on.
Yeah.
It's especially problematic in mobile testing where it's like,
I
hey,
never
is
once
this
thought
happening on
about that.
iOS? Is this happening on, Android? Because those aren't always the same.
Yeah.
Um, it it really just it goes, but like I said with the sword analogy, like how sharp your sword is depends on like how good you are at your job. So the sharper your sword, the better your assessments of like these types of issues and like what you actually need to do to get like the result you want.
I feel like there's almost like a correlation between QA and like chess, because I hope I'm not spreading some like crazy misinformation here, but I remember reading an article that's about they did like brain scans of chess players, different levels,
Mm,
and they had them all play games while being able to look at it. And for chess players that were better, that had a lot more experience, their brain wasn't thinking nearly as hard, and more often than not, it was just thinking of their memory of seeing that board state previously and knowing the proper move just based off of digging up that part of their memory. Versus like a newer player is discovering that play for the very first time. So it's like getting written down in their memory banks for the first time. It
mm,
almost feels like for QA, understanding like having that bug database is almost like having that memory to where they might be able to see a bug, or you might be able to see a bug because you have so much experience. Let's say for I don't know, Goomba stack like bugs, and you just know immediately. I bet I know where this is coming from, and you can kind of like dig into it a little further. So I think that, man, every time I talk to someone at QA, the more I realize how it feels like it's underappreciated and almost kind of like a lost art, to where I don't know. I genuinely feel that way
no, you're not the
because
only one.
yeah, like it seems like there's so many variables. Like for me, I love problem solving, so QA I feel like would be, at least for like the actual work being done, very engaging because all you're doing is solving puzzles on like a consistently day-to-day basis.
Mm,
Sorry about that tangent. The other thing I kind of wanted to ask about for like logging and stuff like that, I assume that once you like, let's say like fix a bug, that you keep all the related information just in case you have to go back and check. So that way, like let's say the Goomba bug reemerges, you can go back, or the Goomba stack bug, you can go back and check. Oh, here's the footage of it happening the first time, and here's what's happening now. Is that like a thing you can do, is compare like similar events like side
yep.
by side?
Yep, that's exactly right. So there's a concept in like software development and especially in testing, like other testing as well, but it's called traceability. And essentially it's like you want the ability to trace info back as far back as you can to its source. So in the case of like, a bug database, you'd want to make sure that like once you write up a bug like this Goomba stack thing, you can then find it again. So then maybe you'd be looking for like what build number was assigned to that bug, so you could find bugs like all the bugs for that build number, or something similar.
Mm-hmm.
And so like in this exact case of like say this bug returns, which is a very possible thing that happens frequently in games, you would then like go back to that bug and see, okay, here's where the change was implemented. Like it was done on build 5. Okay, let's go through the change list and see, okay, we're now on build 25, which try and figure out where in this, like between change 5 and change 25, something happened. Like now our job is to like go in there and find where and why and when. so that that change can be fixed or reverted. And that's like the biggest thing that, like, from my understanding of software development, is just the ability to like essentially roll back to a previous version
Mm-hmm.
where you don't have the problematic code, like, or whatever it may be, in your program at that point. Which, like, it sucks because you essentially lose time, of course, but it's way easier than to just go back to a previous version than, you know, throw the whole thing out and start again from scratch, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to do that.
I guess this is a good opportunity to talk about. Also, this is a question I saw in Twitch chat for those who were listening really quick. We threw on the word nebulous a lot. That word means kind of like hard to pin down, obscured, like having like a foggy idea of something is like a nebulous idea. So
Mhm.
that's when we say that QA kind of has like some nebulous parts to it. I think that maybe even a better term is like it's very fluid. It's not going to be cut and paste everywhere, and like every situation simply cannot be handled the same way as other situations. So it's very like, because of that, I think it can be really engaging or interesting. So there's that. So we have now identified the bug. We have logged the bug. What is next on our path towards fixing it? So I know you mentioned one way is to, you know, you do the rollback, you put it back on the previous version, and it's like, okay, maybe we don't do the Goomba stack there. Maybe we put it somewhere else, see if what happens. What do we do next?
Um, that's on the design team and the programmers at that point. I mean, I've done my job.
Interesting.
I
Okay.
mean, it just depends on the, like, the place. Like, essentially the QA's job, like I said, is to find the defects and then assess the risks. So at that point, I've done all those things. I've said, here's the risks in, like, having this thing. Here's the defects I have found with it. Like, until you have some, like, new behavior for me to verify, like, I would essentially be looking to move on to another task
Mm-hmm.
or, like, another thing to check. Um, which, depending on, like, what my assignment is for something like that, this could be a good time for exploratory testing. Everyone's favorite thing to do. Well, it can be people's favorite thing to do. Some people hate exploratory testing. That's a whole other subject we could have a whole other episode about.
We can get that in a little bit. So the one thing I want to hammer home, because I think it's important, because I think that even I didn't understand the drastic levels of like cut the differences in roles. So QA, for at least for where you work and your understanding of it, is not specifically fixing the bugs.
Yeah, like, it is not my job to go into the level editor and, like, fix the light baking so that the lighting is correct. That is the job of, like, the level designer or the artist or whomever implemented it.
Gotcha.
Because, like, they're the expert in that. They have, just like I have my knowledge of the bug database, they have the knowledge of, like, how those systems are set up, why they're set up the way they are, why the values are the way they are, etc. So that's why you hand the things back to, like, essentially its owner. Um, which obviously you run into problems when, like, hey, what if that person leaves the company, and then, like, well, now who
Oh
owns this thing?
gosh.
You know, Jim owned all the lighting in level 3. Now Jim's not here. Bob, can you do the lighting? Bob's not
This
here either. What do we do?
this almost kind of sounds like the feeling of me going in like elementary school to my teacher being like, here's a math homework, and they'd be like, you effed up on this one, and this one, which of course they wouldn't say in elementary school, but it almost kind of feels like that. um Obviously it's much more, you know, structured and adult like, but I just got that image in my head. um okay, so if that's the case, before we, I kind of, I don't really know how to approach this question exactly, but there's a term that I'm aware of called a triage list, or a bug triage list, where
Mm-hmm.
it is a list compiled by QA folks, and basically it is like from top to bottom a list of discovered issues, and then tagged in some sort of sorting fashion, based on how problematic and urgent each one of those issues are. Is that a real thing, first off?
Yes, bug triage is a real thing. It's done,
Didn't make it
well,
up. Let's go.
so triage is done by, you can do triage for, like, design bugs as well. Like, in game development, a
Oh.
bug usually just refers to, like, a task in Jira. Just depends on, like, who you talk to. Like, at Yacht Club Games, we had, like, a bug database for QA, we had a bug database for development. Even, like, their development tasks, they just referred to them as bugs, even if the
Oh,
bug was to, hey, Alec, can you please go make level 4?
got
Um,
it.
So just like sometimes when I say bug, like that's what I'm referring to.
No, that I
In
think
case
that's I think that's interesting and important because like I literally had always thought that like in terms of like game dev terms that bug was always explicitly just broken thing.
More
You
often
know?
than not, it is, but it's also like it again. It just depends on where you work and how
Mhm.
like how you want to use your jargon. Um, but like like you could certainly do triage on a list of like design or development tasks to divvy those out among a like programming or design team or art team. Um, but as from a QA perspective, like bug triage is done by QA folk and also producers. The production team is also like heavily involved in doing triage of not only bugs but also commits, which is like so the programmer made new code, they've committed that to the build through like Visual Studio or whatever, or like the artists added in a new rock and here's the resources and the files it uses. Um, so you can do a triage of like those types of submissions to try and find out like what's been added, what's been changed, where do we need to focus our testing, like what sort of things do we need to do. Like, if one rock has been added, do I need to check at all the rocks? Do I need to check for similar sized rocks?
Mm.
Like, so that's the rest of like QA work, and a lot of, from what I understand of production work, is essentially like preparing the work ahead of time. That's again what like back to assessing risk. It's like you're looking at what has been put in to figure out, like I said, what work you need to do to ensure that like no defects get to the public facing end of the spectrum.
Gotcha.
Like test early, test often, just like voting.
Perfect. I love it. Because I know that you mentioned like the idea of like checking every single rock. It does. I feel like at least for me, there's a little small game dev company. It's Bethesda. I don't know if any of you play those games. It's pretty small dev company. I find Bethesda bugs to be charming. What's not hilarious about like a death claw continuously falling from space and then clipping to the floor and then repeating that process ad nauseum? It's the best. I know I'm kind of in the minority when I say that because I think there's joy to be found in imperfect things, but I know that gamers don't agree, so to speak. How do you like? So obviously you can't go around checking every single rock. You're not gonna find like every single piece of missing texture. Like it's impossible because you have limited time and limited manpower before like ship date of X, Y, or Z thing. So how often in cases is it that you ship something knowing that like you're going to get some tension from players?
All the time. Literally every release that ever goes out ever will always have like that sort of aspect to it, no matter what game, no matter what company. That's just the nature of the beast. Like, like one of the first things in this is gonna be a little segue, but
No, it's fine.
there's a software like testing's like qualifications board, and so like you can get certified to be a software tester. Like it's just a general software testing, but like with this certification, you could work in like games, the health or like medical industry testing, that type of equipment, automotive, etc. It teaches you how to test software. And so it's called ISTQB. One of the first things they teach you in this syllabus, like lesson 1, exhaustive testing is impossible. Yes. So that just goes back to that thing that we've all heard of, like, no matter how many testers who throw at something, you're never going to find, the same issue, the same number of issues that like your public audience will find on day 1.
Yeah.
Like, Destiny in any live service game is a great example. Like, okay, it doesn't matter if I have my team of 40 do, 5 40-hour weeks testing the new content. Like, we're going to have 200,000 people in a matter of 30 seconds on, launch day. Like, I can't mimic all those interactions.
Yeah.
Like, within any reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, the loss of big numbers for like especially releases that really like kick off huge. It's insane. Like the amount of man hours in the first literally 30 seconds, or even just like playing the first level of a game. You're talking about, even if you had a full team doing 40 hours a week for like 2 years, just on that level, it's like dwarfed in minutes. And like that's just for the first level. That's not even including everything else that goes into it now too.
Yep. Oh, you're right, and that's like one of the like discouraging things about QA to some extent, because like, but you have to not let that get to you, because like there's always going to be bugs that go out, and like no one wants bugs to go through, especially QA people. Believe me, like we don't want them going in either, unless like they've been sanctioned by the development team, because sometimes Easter eggs are cool, you know.
Yeah.
But like, I lost my train of thought. Like, I don't know.
No, but I mean,
you don't want bugs.
I mean,
You don't want
I agree with you. I also think that you hammered home an important part about like kind of working anywhere, but especially like it sounds like in QA, maybe even streaming. There's just gonna be stuff out of your control, right? Like you can endeavor, right, to I want to catch every bug. That is your goal. But understanding that coming up short of that goal does not mean that you have failed, and instead it's just that like it's purely an ideal, right? Like
Exactly.
you are, as long as you know you have done your best and you did your job, like that's like the most anyone can ask of you, right? Like that's just reality. And unfortunately, I mean, you know, like we discussed, like so that book, the first thing it says is that like exhaustive testing is impossible. I feel like that's really the big reason why I wanted to have you on. And it's even better. It's the first thing, is that a lot of gamers, including me, when I was younger especially, are ignorant of a lot of these things because no one ever talks about it, right? Like you have Todd Howard get dragged out from Bethesda and he'll talk about Fallout 79, 69, Lamau jokes. And you know, then you move on with your day. You don't have like the lead QA or like world artist typically come out and talk about like the process behind making these things, you know, because for the most part, most gaming media is for marketing. It's not meant for education. So like, I really hope that if anyone is listening that doesn't know a lot about game design or like doesn't know about like the plight, quote unquote, of QA or like how hard literally all of game design is, not even just QA, like every step of the process is like magic to me, especially. It's that there are just going to be some things that get passed, and it's not due to a developer being lazy. It's not due to like a lack of caring for the product. Because in my experience, not just in QA, but game developers, like they care so much about what they put into. Like, why would you go through now that you're hearing some of these things, why would you do this if you didn't like it? You know what I mean? Like being told almost immediately, oh, by the way, all bugs will eventually go through. Life is pointless. Anyways, the Goomba stack can get fixed. Like that's like the reality, right? Like,
yeah. So that's another thing that like it's not an actual rule, but like it's talked about in many different QA books and software testing books, but especially in games, is that in order to be good at testing, you have to have a certain level of professional pessimism. Like that works in many different aspects. So like, you know, someone could come up to you and say like, oh, hey, I just, you know, I'm a woodworker. I just built this stool. It's the sturdiest thing I've ever built. You can be like, uh-huh, bam. And like, you know, I tested it. It broke. That wasn't very sturdy. Try again.
oh man. Okay, so we
Like,
talked.
It doesn't. Yeah, just real quick. That doesn't come from a place of malicious intent towards the creator. It's
Oh.
merely a matter of like, I have to do my job.
For a moment, I thought that you were like going to like apologize for this fake scenario where it's like I didn't actually like break a woodworker's chair. Like I was like, just
Oh
so.
no, well I haven't done that either. But there have definitely been scenarios where I've found a bug and then like that. This happened at Yacht Club once. I found a bug like. This was only like, they had two programmers, obviously. One was named Ian, the other's named David. I'm like, Ian, I found this bug. He came in, he just like, can I sit at your chair and like look through your Visual Studio and look at the code? And he just sat there with his hand in his head, like scrolling for 15 minutes. And I was just like, I just sat there eating a cookie, like, what have I done?
I've ruined this man's life. And for what? This delicious cookie. It was
$18
worth
an
it.
hour and a bag of Famous Amos cookies.
There you go, face. What a great selling point. Come work for Yacht Club Games. Famous Amos sponsor. We're not actually, nor do I
we're
think
not
Yacht
actually
Club
sponsored.
is sponsored
But-
by Famous Amos Cookies.
But you should go work for them. They're very nice people with lovely benefits package, but I'm not a shill.
I'm
If
I'm
you are a
assuming you mean Yacht Club
programmer,
Games,
though-
not the Famous Amos Cookies, right? You were talking about the Yacht Club still.
Yeah, no. No, you should go work. You should go work at Yacht Club Games. If any of you are programmers, they are hiring, but I digress.
There you go. No, it's fine. Hey, plug it. I'm all about it. Okay, so we've talked about so far like uh, discovering a bug, recording a bug, what that entails, and then like, you know, kind of moving on from there. So one thing I wanted to ask about, because you mentioned that like, so big thing is risk assessment. I don't have a lot of understanding about producer information and like exactly what everything that game dev producers do. But I know that risk assessment is also a big part of their job as well. But I think it's more about the project, like, of the game versus the game itself. So like they're trying to remove risk by like, what if Janice gets sick? How are we going to handle doing this thing, right? Or in your example, programmer gone, feature here, what do? Like
Yes.
but so where does your risk assessment end and theirs begin? Because it almost sounds like you kind of hand it off almost to them at least, and then they kind of divvied up from there. Or am I misunderstanding?
No, you're correct to some extent, because like it just depends on like what stage of the process you're in. But a lot of it is like a lot of like my typical requests these days will go like, hey QA, like I'm a producer and here's the thing that we're going to be implementing for our next in-game event. Could you please prepare a test plan and some test cases, you know, that we can send off to our tester team. And so at that point, then I go, okay, you know, I ask them for like, can you give me documentation of like what's going to be in this like seasonal event? You know, what sort of changes are we doing? What sort of like new content is going in? You know, what sort of things do I need to be aware of? And so from there, it's like I assemble a list of tests I want people to make. Maybe I use pre-existing tests, because like, if say you're implementing like a new NPC and they have a variation of a shop, like, okay, we have a set of tests for like any shop, I'm just gonna have us run those for this shop. Versus like, say I'm testing Destiny of the Lost, or sorry, Festival of the Lost in Destiny, like what's a new thing in there? Like the, you know, the new enemies and new art in the Lost sectors that they added for the event. So like, those are things that I would want to know of, like, you know, those are new things for the event that I need to make sure work correctly.
Yeah.
So as far as like where my risk assessment ends and like productions begins, like it's more or less like I assess like whether or not the game is in a shippable state, and they assess whether, like you said, whether or not like we have all the resources we need to actually get all the work done. And
Gotcha.
like, I'm trying to think. It's funny because when you mention like I don't know what a lot of producers like, in game development do. It's funny. Neither do most producers, from what I understand. Imposter syndrome is rampant in this industry. But
well, I mean, I think part of it's because like gaming itself is an art form, right? So you're trying to like, you can't really imply a broad stroke of like perfect functionality of what like the perfect workflow is for creating like an artistic vision, you know? Especially when you're dealing with things like, so we talked about live service games, or just games in general. I can't imagine how hard it is to be the person who has to like be in charge of like choosing which like features get cut or like maybe pushed harder, because it feels like you're in charge of who will get the most enjoyment out of our player base, which the flip side of that is, who do I want to not receive the thing that they care about? And I don't want anything to do with that. That sounds like misery.
No, you're right. That is a whole other aspect of like, I assume production and also just the design work generally of games is like what's actually important. What, you know, what can we deliver and when?
Yeah.
You know, because believe me, like any quality of life feature, like especially for a live service game that like us players want, believe me, the design team wants those just as badly. It's just a matter of like time and necessity.
So you mentioned earlier that that it's almost kind of up to the designer of the feature or the thing that we're talking about is like being examined, whether it's a bug or not, maybe up for explanation. But so let's say let's take like an MMO, and you are doing QA for an MMO, and you discover like a really fast way to acquire a currency. Is it then, so I assume you do the same old, you'll go to like Jira or whatever, and you'll submit everything being like, here's how I got 10 million gil in Final Fantasy 14 in like 13 minutes. And then is it up to like the development team to decide, well, to take the meme, like, is it a feature now? Are we okay? Like, is that a thing that's also part of your process? Is just like determining maybe faster than normal ways that could like break like game economy stuff? This is a
No,
very
that's
long-winded
definitely a thing.
question. Okay.
Like that's a thing that I've done like in live service games I've worked on. That's even a thing that happened in Shovel Knight. Was like, hey, like there's a certain level you can go into here, and like I can get, 10,000 gold per minute, and then I can just keep repeating this process, and it's basically like infinite money. So like that is another aspect of QA, and another thing that we do is try and like we do try to find exploits for things like that. But oh, this reminds me of there's two jokes that actually like work well with this. So like, how many QA testers does it take to screw in a light bulb?
How many?
0. Our job is to report, not to fix.
Fair.
How many game designers does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Is it also 0?
Well, first let's talk about why you don't want it to be dark. What
Oh.
problem are you really trying to solve?
There was this is also a side note. I did some work with BioWare for Mass Effect Andromeda, and there was we did a lot of like multiplayer, almost like QA work for that, and like consultation around like the multiplayer specifically. But exactly what you're describing was like, I would have a question about what we're playing, and then the game designer who had that feature was like, well, what do you think? It was always like, it's everything is rubber. It just comes right back at you until like you don't ask them a question. Or I'll respond and they'll say, oh, that's interesting, take a note, and then say nothing else. And I'm like,
Game designers can be, I mean, I love game designers as people, but they can also be some of the most frustrating individuals for like that exact reason. But like particularly when you're discussing work, just because like their whole thing, like them being successful entirely depends upon them like not giving you too much information.
yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, it's because you poison the well, and then like, because you want to get a truly authentic answer, and if you tell them what the problem is, then like, of course they'll be like, oh yeah, this is a problem. But like, if they don't notice it, then like, is it really a problem? Is it one of those things where, once again, risk assessment? Is it worth finding the time to be like, all right, do we really need to go back and like, fix that little texture? Can you fall through it? Does it kill you? Does it impede progress? Stuff like that. I feel like I'd like to ask like a more general question, because I feel like unless there's more part of this process we haven't examined, would you be open to me asking other types of questions?
No, go for it. Whatever you want.
So part of this thing that I really wanted to do was to discuss like kind of specifically about the QA work, or just kind of like game dev in general. So what do you think is one of the most important learning experiences you've been through while working QA? And that can be as open-ended as you want it to be. Or one that comes to mind. It doesn't even have to be like the best.
Let me think. I think for me it would be probably that like it doesn't matter. How do I put it? What matters in life as far as like getting the job you want is like the skill and ability to do it. You don't necessarily need to be, a computer science graduate to go become a game designer. And like just because your job title is, X thing, that doesn't mean you're any more or less of a person. Like, which might sound weird, and it might sound like that has nothing to do with work, but like I think that's a very common thing in the game industry is, like I said, imposter syndrome, but especially in QA, because like like we were talking about earlier, it's a field of work that is often underappreciated.
Yes.
And it's often like, at least I find myself like really second guessing like my career choices. Mind you, I'm only a few years into this career, but still it's like every day I do ask myself like, should I instead be learning how to use Python, and like should I be going to become a web developer instead? Like what do I actually want to do? And I don't know, but I'd say the best lesson is just like don't let things discourage you, if that makes sense.
I mean, I think it's kind of hard for QA, because like you said, having a steady level of like pessimism, of like expecting something to break. I think that having the wherewithal like mentally to handle that level of like for lack of a better term, like level-headedness towards the situation, even though it is overtly negative, probably is really hard. And then I can't speak for QA, but for me, like I care a lot about what I make, and I'm assuming QA does too. You know, it's probably hard not to take some of those problems home because you want like a thing that you found to be fixed. I presume, right? Because that's like kind of the whole point. You know, but yeah, like that's got to be really tough. Like, really, really, really tough. Probably
No, you're
more
absolutely
than gets
right.
talked about.
Because like there have been bugs where like, you know, something was found after, you know, a game I worked on released and I felt sad about it, or like we did a submission and something very critical was missed and we failed that submission. So like, you have to not beat yourself up too much. And it's also just, you know, as people have heard, like QA is sometimes described as like the unskilled labor of the game industry, depending on who you ask. And so like depending on how much you have internalized that, if you're a QA professional, like it can take a lot to undo that, essentially.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm very like, in terms of like job searching, which I'm sure we'll also get into in a little bit, but just really quick tidbit on that. Like, whenever I do job interviews for a QA position, I always ask people, especially like whoever the highest ranked person is, like, so do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Quality assurance is the game industry equivalent of unskilled labor. And depending on that answer, that's how you know whether or not it's a good place to work, or like essentially that's how you know whether or not they like actually want and value QA.
Yeah. I think it's a big heckin' shame that you even have to do that, but I mean, like, it does make sense. It's a very good question.
Mm. Well, because it's like, yeah, I didn't go to school for, you know, programming, so I didn't go to school for this or anything, but like what are you essentially asking a quality assurance specialist to do? You are asking them to understand a brand new, like most likely brand new piece of software, become an expert at interacting with it and knowing like all of its in and outs and its functions and all that. You're asking people to use sometimes very esoteric or very buggy software to support like your testing. You know, like I can't tell you how many times Elgato Game Capture would crash on me during Shovel Knight testing. Lovely capture devices, horrible program.
Have you like lost footage of like bugs in progress because of stuff like?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Yikes, dude.
It's frustrating. I curse the Elgato brand.
All right, I've done this 15-minute setup to make sure I can find this exact. No!
Dude,
We lost audio. What do you mean?
that has happened. All of those things have happened.
God,
It's
that's
okay.
rough.
The worst is the 3DS. Because there's no good way to record that thing.
You gotta like,
So-
you gotta ship 3DS off to, like, at least for streamers, it was like, all right, you got this 3DS, throw it across the sea to Japan to some person you've never met. They're gonna throw some stuff inside of it to make it capturable, and you're gonna get it back, and hopefully it works. Like, that was how we were doing it. So
You want to know what I did? I stuck a webcam on an arm inside of a cardboard box and stuck the DS in that so I could capture it without screen glare.
I mean, that's just innovation. That's just being smart. I can't
just what you have to
criticize
do.
this. That it's like oh, what is it? What are they? Like pictographs? Is that what they are? I'm trying to remember. Like the
Oh,
little.
yes. I know the things you're talking about.
Oh,
Like the
like the little
glasses you
red
put on and
things?
you
Yeah.
yeah.
I can't think of what it's called. Viewfinder? Might be a viewfinder.
I don't remember. But I know the thing you're talking about.
Yes, it's like that, but for. Oh, alternatively, you could also make an argument I was talking about the Virtual Boy, but I was not talking about the Virtual Boy.
No, thank God that doesn't exist. I'm very happy I never have to test, like, that's another thing is, like, depending on what generation of console, like, someone came into for game testing, they will either, like, love or hate a various set of, like, consoles or, like, type of, like, gaming format. Like, I know someone that hates the Game Boy Advance SP. Like, they just absolutely
What?
hate it because of when they were testing on it.
Oh, yeah. I
And
love
it's
my
like
SP.
for very similar reasons, I don't like the 3DS very much anymore.
Just impossible to capture.
There-
Gotcha.
There are many other reasons I don't like the 3DS. The capture software is one of them.
I
Or
know me
lack of
trying to
capture
play.
software.
I know that me trying to play Monster Hunter on a 3DS was a nightmare, and that's why I'm very excited that they're doing more console releases and PC releases to save my
Yes,
hands,
less
my
claw,
thumbs. Oh
please.
man, my thumbs were destroyed playing Monster Hunter on a 3DS. Oh my lord.
Yeah.
Ugh. Okay, so aside from that, is there, if you could like give a piece of advice, so that's what you learned, you know, that you think is most valuable to you, what is the best piece of advice you could give to someone, whether or not they're doing QA, but like wants to enter the games industry? What is like a singular thing that you would love to tell them?
Hmm. Don't be in a hurry, for one. Life is a marathon, not a sprint. I'm learning that myself as well. Like take it from me, like I consider myself a failure in many aspects. Like, you know, I don't make 6 figures a year. I'm okay. I'm perfectly fine. I'm happy. I'm healthy. Don't get me wrong, but like I'm not doing like the things that I always thought I wanted to be doing. And I didn't realize until like halfway through my 20s that like I felt like I went to school, like to college specifically, too early. Um, but I digress. My point is like don't be in too much of a rush, no matter what you think you want your career to be in games or otherwise. Um, Especially because like depending on the company, like they'll still be there tomorrow. Like most of these successful companies aren't going
Yeah.
anywhere, barring some sort of weird economic crash. Um, so like be patient for one, and two is be very sure of like what it is you want to get into. And the reason I say that is because, especially if you want to like try and go to school for it, obviously schooling is very expensive. So for some cases you do have one shot, but it's also a matter of like, in games especially, whatever you're doing ends up being like your life in like whatever, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And so like that's good in that like you can get really skilled and good at like one specific thing or one general area, but it can also be a matter of like if you end up doing something that isn't something you want to get lost in doing, like 14 plus hours a day, not saying that people always do that, but like that's I sometimes feel that that's the type of like feeling you need to have.
Like the level
Not,
of love that you would need to continue forward.
yeah, and it's not even like necessarily love or passion, it's more of like
Determination? Better word?
determination, more like, you know, do you
Grit?
mind doing these actions? Are you doing things that like interest you and make you happy?
Does it bring you joy? Throw it
Yes.
out.
Does it? Yes. Basically, because like, you know, do I enjoy QA? There are aspects of QA I enjoy. Yes. Would I be happier doing something else? Perhaps. Like I've dabbled in game design,
Mm-hmm.
but trying to get into game design is a very difficult thing. Like that thing specifically. And so just to go back to like when I say like know what you want to do, like have a pretty good idea. Um, the reason is because like you have to put a lot of time into whatever discipline it is,
Yeah.
to get good at it. You know, the longer you wait, like me, I'm 30 now, like the harder it is because the more catch up you have to do. Um, and so like even for like design, like okay, you want to be a designer. Do you want to be a level designer, a narrative designer, a systems designer, a combat designer, you know, on and on and on. So like, you know, if you're the type of person who's out there and like you really love math, you really love crunching numbers, maybe you'd be an economy designer. If you're more like me and you're more interested in like the interactions the players will take, maybe you want to look into like Unreal Engine and like building the levels in the actual physical spaces. Um, so just without rambling too much, like just make sure you know what you want to do like somewhat ahead of time, but also don't be in a rush. Like
Yeah.
pick your battles and just make sure that whatever it is, like you do enjoy it. Because
Yeah.
you don't want to end up like hating what you do for a living. I mean, that's true no matter what you do. But like,
Well, I think that I agree completely with everything you said. Um, the two of the big lies I feel like I heard growing up was one, if you work your dream job, you never work a day in your life. It's a lie. It's a lie.
yeah,
It is.
absolute
Work
lie.
is work. There's times where things that you love are work. Family
Hmm.
is a great example. Like family or relationships with people are hard, and you got to put effort into them, even though you love the result, right? Like work can be the same way. It's a
Hmm.
relationship you have to cultivate and put time into, and sometimes you don't want to,
Yep.
right?
Like a good clean cut example is my friend Sandy, pixel artist at Yacht Club.
Mm-hmm.
Like very skilled animator, absolutely loves like creating characters and doing environments and all that stuff. But like obviously, just like with QA and any other job, like not everything is sunshine and roses. Sometimes there are days where it's like, hey, here's 40 characters that are 5 pixels tall.
Oh,
We need you to make an idle animation that's just them like lowering 1 pixel and raising a pixel again. You know, or like, hey, we're making a platformer. We need some, wooden crates to jump on and all that. Like, go ask your any artists, whether they be 3D, pixel,
how
2D,
many
whatever.
boxes
Like,
have you made today?
yeah, so you're an environment artist. How many doors have you animated today? Like, how many doors have you made in your career?
Meanwhile, like as soon as you ask that question, you just see like the visible eyes glazing over. Like,
Yep.
sorry, what?
Like,
Oh, how many doors? Oh,
How
sorry,
many
I was.
rocks have I put in an environment today?
Alternatively, they just leave. They just walk out the room.
It's true. It's true.
And then
Uh,
and then the idea of like being patient, I completely agree. Like the other thing is like what was the term? Like life waits for no man. It's got time.
Yeah,
Like
life does wait for no man, but as you said, it does have time. But it's just the game industry moves at molasses pace because of like the amount of this kind of gets into like
there's so much.
something to do with there's so
There's
much that
just
has to
there's
go
like
into it.
that's like
There's
the best way to put it. Is there's just so much.
like people think that adding any one thing to a game is just like, oh, like, well, you just tell a programmer, hey, make this UI, bam, it's done, it's in the game, we're good to go. It's like, no, like that has to go through like art, like production, marketing, QA, like there's so many different departments have to sign off on just getting the simplest of things done, which is why
Yeah.
seemingly small things can take weeks.
Yep.
It takes a village to make a game, and it takes a city to make a AAA game.
Yeah.
As you can tell from looking at the credits. So like, a team the size of Yacht Club working on Shovel Knight in 2013, 2014, like 5 to 6 people. Very easy to pivot and make changes to some degree. Nothing in game development is easy, but like, basically what I'm getting at is like, say one of them says, hey, I think our character should be blue instead of red. That takes the agreement of 5 people instead of like
Yes.
months
100,
of deliberation.
300. Yeah, there was I forget how long it was. Maybe 1 or 2 years ago. I remember seeing a Twitter thread talking about businesses and how every time you have a new hire, how it adds the complexity of communications within that company, and like it's exponential for every single person you add. So when you're talking about like a game dev company of 600 people, like there's so many things that like have to be approved and looked at by so many people that like yeah, it's gonna be slow, and there's some things you just can't like. The easiest way to solve any game dev problem, as far as I'm aware, time, money, problem solved.
Oh yeah, everything would be so much better if we just had infinite time and infinite money.
Guess
My
yeah, I was
God.
about to say guess what we don't have either of those.
Either of those, sadly. Sadly, we do have deadlines. We have a never-ending supply of deadlines to meet.
Oh man, it's crazy. It's not fair. I was
Who
told
keeps
there
making
would.
those things?
You'd think they would stop. Like you think that
Yeah.
people would like. It's gotten a 1-star rating every time it's come out, and they keep making sequels every single time. There's a new deadline. It's awful.
So, speaking of deadlines, just to kind of demystify some more of the QA process really
Please.
quick. Like, so in terms of like, why does a fix take so long? Like, in an example of like, say a game is on both like Steam and Xbox and PlayStation. Like, why is it that a push can be a fix can be pushed to Steam in a matter of like minutes once it's done, but it takes months for Xbox and PlayStation to get that fix. So the reason is something called certification, which is essentially like the official process of like, hey, we have a build of the game. Sony or Microsoft or Nintendo or Apple, whomever, please review this and see that it meets any of the standards for release on your platform. Which, includes many number of things depending on what state of the project you're in. But the point is that this whole process requires like 2 to 3 weeks minimum.
Yeah.
And so that's a full week of like, you submit, it takes a week for them to then notice and get started on your submission. It takes them 2 weeks for their team to do what they need to do with it. And then you get a response as to whether or not you passed and can release that version of your software, whether it be a new build or a patch or what have you. And goodness help you if you fail that, because that is expensive, for one, and there's a lot of other penalties that can come from failing a lot check.
I mean, plus on top of that, it's just time wasted, and you hate,
Exactly.
you despise wasted time.
Exactly. Like there's nothing any development team like fears more than like we failed cert. Like those 3 words will like just tank morale for everybody.
So
yeah.
because we're talking about cert, I want to get to some Q&A. So chat, if you have specific questions about quality assurance and game dev, type them in chat. I've already got a couple rearing to go, but if you have any more, now is the great time to ask them. I'll pull them later.
I also have a question for all of you as well. I have a game development exercise for all of you.
We love that.
Whatever you'd like.
So because it's about cert, and specifically about like the game is growing, right? And you're adding more to it over time. Can you briefly, if you understand it, describe what tech debt is in regards to QA specifically?
So in regards to QA specifically, like tech debt would be like you are making too many test cases that you're only ever going to run once. And you basically like you're just creating this whole giant list of things that like you need to keep track of. And like this is like the greatest challenge of any budding software organization, especially startups, is like how do we organize our data? You know, how do we avoid tech debt, whether it's on the programming side, whatever side. So like for QA, it's like when you start the project, typically people make things in Google Docs and Google Sheets, which quickly becomes overwhelming, too large, and too difficult to navigate. So then you have to figure out what tool you want to change to in order to still organize everything. But then you run into the issue of like, well, now I have like this whole Google database to maintain and have knowledge about, and I have this new database to like make sure there's parity between and all that. So like technical debt is the debt you accrue from the choices you make during the software development processes, and it's things that you have to constantly take into account whenever you're trying to implement a new process in your workflow.
Yeah.
And you're also constantly trying to figure out how to go about that and how to make things more efficient.
From the limited understanding that I have about like tech debt, is that it's also incredibly more complicated for like live service games, because it's not something that ever ends technically, because as long as you're supporting a singular title, that means that title is expanding and growing, and you have to keep track of more and more and more and more and more and more and more things. So like the easy example I can think of is a game like Destiny, to where it's like, for those who don't know, Destiny is like a game with lots of loot in it. They add new guns all the time. So like a tech debt example there is like testing every single gun against every single enemy in the game to make sure it's not like breaking, or making the decision, we don't do that because it's not worth the time. But like it is a part of the debt that you're hopefully don't have to pay, but it exists. So like it's this ever growing, man, it's almost like a nightmare. Like it just sounds like a nightmare.
Well, so that's kind of what the risk assessment is, and like Telesto is a very good example of like, you know, do we want to test Telesto with every single other interaction in the game?
Yes, is the answer, but you don't want to.
Yes,
should you?
We do.
Yes, you do.
Should we? Yes. Are we going to? No, because like we don't have infinite time and money.
So once again, for people who don't play Destiny, Telesto is a gun that is the only gun in the game that historically, with every single patch and release, breaks something in the weirdest ways possible. Like, it's stuff that just doesn't make sense, where it's like, oh, but it's because it's Telesto. Okay. Oh, you mean I shot this gun one time and then like the boss just went away? Okay, that's just Telesto. It just does that. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's a feature.
Telesto in itself is like the personification of technical debt. If you had to think of technical debt in terms of like an actual like physical air quotes thing, just picture Telesto.
Oh, I love that.
Like everything about it is just cursed. Another example of like technical debt is like a good example for like all the streamers in the audience is like, say you're adding something new to your stream setup, like a new webcam light or something, or like a new program like in your stream deck, like when you're trying to go live and like, you know, you forget one day. Like, you know, that's a new thing you have to add into your workflow to spin up your stream. So like there's similar things.
Can you lower your goddamn voice when talking about my personal life, please? Thank you. Jesus. You can't just go around saying things that are 100% accurate and true. It's not fair.
Hey,
Also,
that's between you and God, man.
I don't know who heard it, but my big cat suplexed my smaller cat out of the cat bed. I think it was behind me, but it was very loud.
I saw that.
Okay, so before, do you want to ask your question to chat and to me, or do you want to do questions really quick?
Here, I actually do want to post this to all you so you can think about it in the back burner. So, here's the question that I always like asking people with, like, especially if they're like, oh, I want to work in the game industry, like, no matter what discipline it is. So here's the question. The game has doors. Tell me about them. From the perspective of any discipline, the game has doors.
The game has doors.
The game has doors. Tell me about them.
Tell
me about the types.
Is it
types
Silent
of things
Hill
each
the
discipline would
room,
use.
and it's a very long loading screen? Is that what it is? Is that what the door is? Or alternatively, is it Resident Evil 1 where it's and then the game loads?
It's something like that, but it's kind of like they're like, I forget. I think it's Liz Englund. She has a very good blog post on this subject. But the door problem is essentially like, the game has doors. What does each discipline think of when you tell them there's a door? Like, a programmer might think like, okay, how does the door have to open? An artist might think, what color is the door? What size is the door? Is this the door to like an office building, to a castle? You know, QA might be like, I threw grenades at the door. I died in the door.
Can I break the door, or have the door alternatively break me?
Yeah, marketing could even be like, can we use this door in some sick sort of like marketing campaign and ad? Is like the whole game about like opening this door? Like, is it Paper Mario the 1,000-year door? And like the door is the selling point, and like
I still can't
the
believe
one thing.
I still can't believe that Nintendo produced a video game that you have to wait 1,000 years to finish it. I cannot believe that they did that.
We're all still waiting.
Well, hopefully
the one game we will all never finish.
Miyamoto's like, good.
You know that
I have them hooked.
The only people that have finished that game are the testing team, because they're the only ones with the debug commands to skip forward 1,000 years.
That's simple. That's true. That's true.
Simple.
Yeah, I just set my Switch clock to 3021. We're done. Done. Easy.
Sorry, the other day I woke up and I just had this really dumb shower thought, you know, when you're tired and you just your brain's just not working. I'm like, wait, if I want to play Metroid Dread early, I can just set my Switch's calendar forward to this Friday, and bam, it's in the eShop.
That game was so good, by the way. I was like I was a kid again. Oh, it was so good.
Agreed. I need to finish it.
It's great. You'll love it.
So far, I'm liking it. I forget where I'm at. Some tentacle boss, and it made me frustrated. But anyway, Chad.
I bet I think I know exactly which one it is.
Yeah, the blue and pink and...
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't figure it out yet. I'll figure it out. But anyway,
she
Chad,
pooped! I can smell it!
She did it!
She
no,
did
it's good. But if you want to get into the game industry, and you're not sure, think about the door problem. And, depending on, say, basically, the reason I ask this is, if you don't know what you want to do in games, your answers to the door problem might help you figure out oh, I want to be an artist, or maybe I'd like thinking about, you know, design of some sort. A lot of finding work in the game industry is basically figuring out like I said, what type of work you enjoy doing, and figuring out how to spin that. I enjoy solving puzzles. I enjoy finding cool things in games. I enjoy making people's lives easier. So I'm in QA, at least right now. And it allows me to touch many different aspects of game development. Because, you know, like I said earlier, I work with programmers, producers, artists, designers, etc., etc. I talk to everybody. Yeah. Anyway, what does chat have for us?
Okay. So the first one is this is good because you're also a speedrunner, so I think this is maybe a little more up your alley, especially. Does QA look for sequence breaking things specifically, or is that not really a thing you can search for? So something that could render the game unplayable because, let's say, you skip a trigger, or alternatively skipping, you know, a whole sequence of events to then get the reward at the end. Is that the kind of stuff that you also test for, or is that something different?
Those are also things you test for. Those are things that depending on how it happens, that's something you could make a test case for. I could literally make a list of concrete steps, okay, I'm going to teach you how to sequence break Super Metroid. Go to Meridia, acquire more Fall Bomb. I don't actually know if that's how you do, but you see what I mean. That sort of stuff is something the testers are asked to consider sometimes. But a lot of the times those types of issues are, I don't want to say less important because that's not the right word. It's more like those aren't the types of things that people are looking for on a first pass necessarily.
It's also one of those things to where it's like we talked about triaging bugs earlier, and the triage bug list is that like something like that, even if you discovered it, unless it was like something that prevented progress, is pretty low on the totem pole compared to like, oh, when I do this, I blue screen my computer. Right, like that is like, no, we can't have that because then potentially you can't pass cert, especially if you're like on Xbox or a PlayStation or something, especially.
Yeah, like a decent example of something like this I can think of. It's like not quite the same because it's not a sequence break, but it's a similar type of thing. Is like, say you're playing Destiny and you're playing in a fire team and like you break off from the group. They go forward in the strike and you get like a joining allies thing because the door to continue in the strike like closes for you and you can't continue. Like that sort of scenario is like, you know, should there be a check for like the player can't get stuck alone and they can always be able to proceed forward? Like, there's an answer to that problem, which is just have them join allies. But like, I don't know, it's weird. But like, sequence breaks are a thing we look for. Like that, it's more of like a good example is on Shovel Knight. One of the achievements is beating all 4 of the Wandering Travelers, Mr. Hat, Baz, Reese, and Phantom Striker. It turns out that for the first like 3 years of that game being out, if you beat Mr. Hat last of those 4,
it just counts.
If you beat him last and took the catapult out of that level instead of exiting normally, you could never get that achievement on that file. You had to start a new file because the way the check ran for you getting the achievement was it ran when you got back to the world map after exiting the level where you fought the boss. So essentially, like in that scenario, I've found a loophole in the logic where instead of it checking for level exit, it needs to check for some other thing. Because I've now given it 2 level exits and I didn't get my achievement. So like that's a sort of sequence break style thing where it's like I've done something slightly out of order and the expected result has not been given to me.
Yeah.
Like those are always things that we do look for. It also just depends on the game because like, you know, a game like Shovel Knight where everything is very like individual level based, it's like I'm not gonna suddenly like teleport from level 2 to level 6, like that's just not gonna happen. But I could like clip through a wall in level 2 and get to a different part of level 2. Like that sort of thing could happen. Anyway.
No, I mean I think it's important to understand because like, you know, as long as like the situation, you know, maybe you soft lock yourself when you have to like reset your game or whatever, and hopefully it doesn't like checkpoint you to like you're like, you know, permanently soft locked, which is always just like the worst. But yeah, like there's just it's not something that is high on the priority list compared to other things you're looking for.
Exactly.
Another question we got, because we have a few more minutes left, so we'll be pretty quick. So how much of QA is spent actually playing the games versus leveraging debut tools and external software? And like that's kind of like you don't just sit there and play games, but we're gonna, you know, presume it was like how much time do you spend like testing versus using the tools?
It depends on the task I'm doing, and like for me, it depends on the project I'm on. Like for what I've been doing now, I've only been on my job 4 weeks, so I'm like mostly using a lot of the tools to try and like get into like what we're building and figure out what I need to, you know, actually work on. But that said, there are still things where like, you know, we're implementing stuff for, you know, future content. I need to get into the game and actually play through it as like a regular user to understand like how it works and where you are supposed to go to like get to that content and everything. So there is still a ton of like, there's ample opportunity for that exploratory testing sort of where you're just playing the game.
Yeah.
It just depends on what your workload is like. At Yacht Club, I had a ton of time to do that, which was both good and bad. Because it was good because it gave me time to really dig in and find some of those like really obscure like engine bugs with like, hey, I jumped on this frame and then bad things occurred. Gameplay programmer, please help. But then there's also scenarios of like I've been exploring the same level for the last 2 weeks. I have found every issue I can possibly think of. I am tempted to implement bugs myself so that I will have more work.
I got you.
But yeah.
Okay, then this is something that you may have to like maybe not give the best answer for it, because I know that like NDAs exist, especially for a lot like anything people produce and stuff like that. 'Cause, no one wants to have their like cutting room floor stuff thrown on the big screen. It's the whole point of the cutting room floor. But someone asked, what is the most minor bug you have found that actually proved to be a pretty big problem? And you can be as general as you want. You don't got to give specifics if it's an issue, or we can move on.
Trying to think. Like, that depends on minor. Again, minor, nebulous. The term just keeps coming back. Like, what's minor?
You're welcome to use however interpretation you want. Like, something maybe you perceived as being a small issue at the time that upon further investigation was like, oh, oops. There was just like 100 spiders in there. And it's like, I'd close that up, burn it, send it away.
I know those have happened where, like, especially on Shovel Knight, where, like, I found a thing and was just like, hey, I noticed I, like, I hit, like, this block into a wall, and, like, something weird happened. I don't know what's going on. I couldn't reproduce it. Like, can you look into this and see what's going on? And the programmer's like, thank God you found this. If this had been allowed to, like, fester, like, people's computers would have exploded, and, like...
Oh... Yeah,
okay.
like a memory leak type issue or something like that like you don't really know the extenuating impacts like resolving something might have.
Yes. Yeah. As far as like some other things that like you might think are more innocuous, like say you're playing a game on a mobile phone, and there's a way to like open up a web browser inside the game and like just to go to like that company's support page or whatever. What if someone was of the mind of trying to browse the rest of the internet via that web browser? And what if they found a way to do that? What if that person found a way to install apps to that mobile device without using the Google Play Store, but instead using that video game?
Oops.
Seems innocuous, like I haven't technically done anything wrong. I just installed WhatsApp through another game. But that does violate some submission
Well, that's
protocols.
like some big security problems too, right? Like...
Yeah, to some extent, details.
Okay. So we are wrapping up here, chat. So Cameron, do you have anything that you want to say before you go? Do you want? And you're welcome to plug yourself if you want to plug your Twitch stream, anything that you're working on. Feel free. Floor is yours.
I don't really have anything to plug. Be nice to each other. Donate to charities you think are worthwhile. Play Unsighted on Steam. I think it's on other platforms too. It's like an indie top-down Metroidvania Zelda-esque game. I don't know, it looks really cool. I've been dying to play it. It's made by some cool people from, I think, Brazil. I don't know, go play it. It's a cool game. It's like $10, $20.
Heck yeah.
Go play it.
You can find Cameron on Twitter at, it's on the screen, at MunchaKoopaSK, MunchaKoopaSK, if you want to find him. So if you have more questions about QA, and he's feeling generous and nice, he might answer them for you. Also, before the show, I asked him what his favorite charity was, and he said Direct Relief. So for him being here, our show is going to contribute $250 to Direct Relief. So thank you so much for being here. I obviously can't pay you what you're worth because I'm simply one man and not a corporation. But I'm trying. So thank you so much, chat. Yeah, so this has been the first episode of Tea Time with Teawrex. I need to run a 3-minute ad break on the way out because we have to have enough ads for Amazon to support this show. So I'm going to throw on our starting screen, but we are done for the day. Next week, we're going to have my friend Rowan on talk about merchandising for the Among Us franchise, among many other things that they've done. I'm very excited for it. It's going to be awesome.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay,
I'm like, that's...
Okay, so for anyone wondering why that's hype, it's because that, like, Among Us obviously blew up, and like
that's why I'm so fascinated. I want to know that process of like escalating.
Exactly. And
like
trying to get that done like correctly without messing up. That's gonna be you're gonna get a lot of insight out of that. I think. So I will definitely be coming back for that one.
Well, you can't be on. It's just her. I'm joking.
No, I'm just gonna watch, man.
Thanks for being here, man.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. All right, chat. I'll see you next week or tomorrow if you come into my stream. And have a great night. Bye-bye.